Tess, I'm so happy to have you on the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. You're my original personal finance superhero. So this
Oh my
is
God.
exciting for me.
So honored. And so Tess and I have known each other for a little over a year now. I don't know, time on the internet, I feel like doesn't make sense and isn't a thing. And Tess and I first got to know each other when you were inside the Finance Creators Mastermind, and we had the pleasure of working together. And Tess is just a badass bitch who combines fitness and finance and talks about that on the internet as well. And we have a lot of the same beliefs around money. And I was really just looking for an excuse to catch up with her. And so I was like, come on to the podcast. I haven't talked to you in a while.
I love that. I love that.
So before we dive in, because I really just want to, I actually have never really heard your full story. I know bits and pieces about your story, but I want to kind of learn a little bit about that. What got you into like caring about money in the first place and all that good stuff. But before we do that, tell the folks who you are on the internet, what you do in real life, and where they can find you.
Sure. So my name is Tess Waresmith. I am a finance coach. I have an online beginner investing program that teaches mostly women the basics of investing, although anyone can join my program, but I am very passionate about the gender wealth gap. And I teach people the basics of investing and do it in a way that's super digestible and uses human words that people can understand. So that's what I do. I like to post a lot of content for free on Instagram at Wealth with Tess, on TikTok as well. Finally, I made it over to TikTok. That felt like a win because I'm an elder millennial. I think I'm an elder millennial. So that was a win. And also on my website as well at wealthwithtess.com.
I love it. And if I remember right, when you first started off and you first joined the Finance Creators Mastermind, your handle was like Tessatory or something. Yeah, I remember. I was just thinking that I just had like a flashback because I think in my mind, I still think of that as your handle, even though I know it's Wealth by Tess or Wealth with Tess. I don't know. I just
Wealth with Tess.
Wealth with Tess, because like I just go to Tess and I don't have to think about it.
Yeah, it was one of those things that was a little hard to change because I had identified with Tessatory for so long. It was a nickname that some of my teammates, when I was a springboard diver, was my sport. I did that for years and they called me that. And so I was a little emotional giving it away, but now I've fully embraced Wealth with Tess and I love my handle now. So I'm very glad I changed it. And that's you, actually. You were the one that convinced me to change it.
I did.
You're like, you got to do it.
You got to do it because I was like, if you had commented on something before, because you had followed me before we had connected, and I believe you had been commenting on things and along those lines, I would have never known you were a finance page. So I was like, well, you got to put it in your handle. And it was the same thing for me. I first started out as Chloe_Bear, even when I was like creating content on finance. And I remember like polling my audience, my whole like 2,000 followers at the time, and was like, should I change this to Chloe Bear Money Coach? And everybody's like, yeah, do it, because I think this is a personal page. And then I did it. And so obviously now I'm biased towards that. If I could start it all over, I might try to do like my name. But at the same time, how are they going to know that, like, just based off the handle, that that's what I talk about? They're not going to know I talk about money by Chloe Daniels,
I like it. I like the personality of it.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
Thank you. Thank you for the validation.
Yeah. Sure.
But so Tess, we are going to definitely talk about one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on, which is kind of how you got screwed over by a fiduciary financial advisor who was a CFP. She just revealed that to me before the call, because this entire time I thought it was just a financial advisor, like somebody who had maybe their Series 6 or Series 7. But it turns out it was actually fiduciary, which, as you guys know, as you're listening to this, that's what we recommend if you're going to work with somebody. And that's a big if, because I think a lot of people, and in fact, I would even argue most people probably do not actually need a financial advisor. But if you choose, if you're like, I hear you, Chloe, but I still don't want to do it, and I'd rather hire somebody, we always say that if you are going to do it, even though we don't think you need to, you always want to pick a fiduciary CFP. And Tess did that, and she ended up having a really terrible experience. So I want to talk about that. I want to share that with you all. But before we get to that, I want to hear about your story, Tess. So tell me, we're going to start from the beginning. As Chloe Bear does, we're getting bare. What was money like for you growing up?
When I grew up, I remember being very afraid of not having enough money from the jump. And my mother was always saying things like, we need to make sure we can be able to afford this. I'm not sure if we have enough money for that. We lived in a very modest house. We all drove Saturns. That was a car back then. If you're a youthful person, you might not know that. Elder millennial again. And so I was always very afraid of money. I remember hiding money. I'd find coins and I'd hide it even when I was a kid. And when I started babysitting, I would love counting my money and putting it into sock drawers wherever I put it. Eventually, I opened a bank account. I even remember, I've actually never even shared this publicly, I think, but I used to actually loan money when I was 14 and 15 to the drug dealer down the street, and he would give me like a percentage back. I think that was my first investment.
How old were you?
Like 15. It only happened twice,
Tess,
but there were
that's amazing.
And it was like my babysitting money. He's like, hey, like I need to go pick up some stuff. And I'd be like, oh, I always had cash because I was hoarding every little thing I made. And I started babysitting when I was young. So I'd be like, sure, I'd give you a couple $100.
Oh
And then
my
he'd give me
gosh.
a couple hundred plus 20 back. I guess that was my first investment. I didn't even remember that.
Amazing. I absolutely love that story. You're like, I was actually part of a drug operation at 15 years old and didn't even think about it. It was my first investment. I was an angel investor in the local drug dealer.
He did really well until he didn't, but he did really well for a while.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing. Now, tell me, with all this fear at a young age, where do you think it came from? Was it something that you had witnessed your parents stressing about money a lot? Like, where did that stress begin? Where did that fear begin?
It's really interesting because my mother and my stepdad were just super conservative about money. They both came from middle class / my stepdad came from a very poor family growing up. So I think they both had a lot of fear. And in contrast, my father would come pick me up on the weekends and he drove a Mercedes. And when I went to visit him, he had all this fancy stuff. Fast forward 40 years, he's 6 months behind on mortgage payments and has no retirement and no money to speak of. And so I think that contrast was interesting to me because I felt like at home, we didn't have money compared to this other person that had all this money. And now in hindsight, it's actually the complete opposite, ironically, which is wealth is what you don't see is a real thing. And so I think that contrast gave me a lot of fear. And then as I was growing up in high school, my mother and my stepdad would be asking me what I was going to do about college. They weren't going to pay for it. And I was a springboard diver. And I just knew very early on that I had to do sports to get a scholarship to go to college because no one was going to pay for it or I would have to work for it. So I think that idea made me really aware of finance because I was so focused on getting a full scholarship because I didn't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, that worked out. That was great. Like, and that's actually like the beginning of my story of how I got here. But you know, that fear actually ended up being a good thing. Eventually, I had to unpack some stuff, but it did create a focus around making sure I had enough.
Yeah. Well, and making sure that you were self-sufficient and like that you were the one who could handle any of those things. I think too, and I relate to the fear of like, oh, wow, the only way I'm going to be able to pay for this is doing XYZ for college. Because my parents had 5 kids and I knew from the very beginning I was going to have to take out student loans. It was like, from the beginning, but what's interesting is I never thought, well, let me go apply for a million different scholarships. It was like, well, I guess I'm going to have student loans, but I think it's because, and I just had this thought as you were saying this, I think it is because debt was so normalized in my family. It was just like, you're going to have to take out $100,000 in student loans. Like, that's just how it works. And it was just like, well, that's what everybody in my sphere of influence was doing. So it was just this normalized thing. So it's interesting how individuals can like take similar information and like completely do different things with it.
Yeah, totally. And when I grew up middle class in a very wealthy town, so I just assumed everyone else's parents were paying for everything. And in a lot of cases they were. And I just knew that wasn't an option for me. But I think through sports, when I realized that scholarship was a thing, that's what I became hyper focused on.
Amazing. I love that. So then you head into college, I assume got a scholarship. And what was kind of your money management style when you were a young adult, like college and then starting off on your own?
Sure. So in college, I'm very, very privileged and fortunate to have a full scholarship. I had everything paid for, like food, books. It was the work. So I'm very lucky. And then after I graduated, and this is the beginning of my money story, I graduated into a recession and I got rejected from every single job I applied to, at least 30 or 40 jobs. I was bartending at this dive bar called the Chicken Bone that was on Bar Rescue. It didn't make it.
Amazing.
And then the bar was not rescued. And at some point I ended up getting asked to, I was a springboard diver. That was my sport. And I had no luck finding jobs, and an opportunity came my way to be a diver on a cruise ship, like in a Cirque du Soleil type show. And, at first I said, no, I just graduated from college. I'm too good for that. And then 2 months later, when I couldn't find a job, I said, sure, I'll come on the cruise ship. So I went. And that's kind of where my money story begins, because I ended up being able to save a lot of money. And as somebody that had a ton of fear, I was living on the cruise ship, everything was paid for. And I thought, this is my opportunity to hoard all this money. And so I saved as much as I could over the few years I worked on cruise ships. And I knew enough to know that I wanted to invest it, but I just assumed that investing was far too complicated. And I actually did read some investing books, but they were all about stock picking and reading financial statements. And it just seemed so overwhelming that I was like, I can't possibly do that. I need to find somebody to do this for me. So I had a friend at the time who was a certified financial planner, and I kind of gave her my money and just said, do stuff, make it be more. And that happened for a few years. And at some point, and I don't remember exactly when this happened, but I realized that the return seemed pretty low. It was like 6%, and the market was doing a lot better. And I didn't really understand the basics of investing at that time. But for the time, now that I look back, it was egregiously low. This was in the, mid 2010s. So now I look back, it was really low. But at some point I realized this is something not quite right here. Also, in this time, she had sold me an annuity, which was a financial product better suited for somebody in their 50s. I found this out later than somebody in their late 20s. And she had received commission off of that. And unfortunately, that was $20,000, which I could have invested, as a 26-year-old or 27, whenever I was. And we both know with compound interest, what that could have been in 40 years, it would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's, that was a big, sad mistake.
Jeez.
But the other thing that even more than the annuity, because I'll say this, by the way, I think that she is a well-intentioned person. I think that the industry creates a system that rewards people for not necessarily making choices in the best interest of your clients.
Yeah.
And so she, for whatever reason, had justified this product for me. And the part of the justification that I don't understand is what was actually in my portfolio. So when I eventually started diving into all the investments in my portfolio, I found there were at least 30 different mutual funds and index funds. And a lot of them were duplicates. I found this tool online where you could put in the ticker symbols, and the ticker symbol, for those of you that are newer to money, is the letters that are assigned to whatever mutual fund that you're buying. And so I put in the ticker symbols to see what the overlap was. And some of them were overlapped 90%. And some of them had way, way higher fees, like crazy high fees. And they were almost the same investment. I found out later that some of those funds, the financial advisors also get commission on. So all in, I was probably paying well over 2% in fees. I've done the math, super sad to figure out how much I probably missed out on. And it's hundreds of thousands of dollars that I probably would have had as part of my net worth, in 20 years or so, that I wasn't able to get.
Yeah.
But, I think the worst one was the annuity itself, because that's money that I can't get back. And I've actually I've written letters, I've petitioned people, I filed a formal complaint. I've had other financial experts look at that annuity and say that annuity is better suited for somebody in their 50s. It makes absolutely no sense. It's not a suitable financial product for you. And I didn't really get anywhere.
Geez, so are you still stuck with the annuity?
Yeah.
No way. So you can't even cash it out and get any your cost basis out of it?
No. So most
Jeez.
annuities have a surrender charge, and you can potentially surrender for a pretty large fee and get some of that money back. I can't get $1 of that back until I'm 60 or 65, at which point I might get $93 a month from this annuity.
From a $20,000 annuity? That's terrible. Oh,
it's really bad.
Sucks. I'm sorry to hear that happened to you. I guess it is one of those things where it's you're glad it happened to you when you were young. It's also more painful that it happened to you when you're young, because of compound interest now. But, luckily you've set yourself up to where it's no longer an issue. I think about that with my whole, my ex-boyfriend owing me 60 grand still to this day for his flipping project. And it's I know I'm never going to get that money back, but yes, is it painful, but I'm glad I made that mistake when I was 26, not when I was, 56. So that's just so wild. Did you ever ask her reasoning behind that? Or like why, other than
Yeah.
obviously we know the commission, but you had mentioned like, and I want to say too, I think this is really a common scenario. People choose people they know. They get the DM, the message, the LinkedIn message from somebody who they went to high school with or who is like an acquaintance, maybe even a friend. And because of that, that's like the base level of trust already. Like you're like, I don't know what to do with this money. Investing is a scary thing. Oh, thank God my friend Peyton from high school is doing this. I can just give them my money. At least I know I can trust them. Like we went to school together. But often that's not really the best move, especially because of that relationship. Because if your financial advisor is doing something, just like we, often don't want to be friends with landlords. We don't necessarily always want to be friends with people who have any sort of power over us because we need to feel comfortable in questioning that power and requesting changes and not being concerned about like, oh, am I hurting their feelings? Am I making them doubt themselves or whatever? So I do want to highlight that to the folks who are listening, because if you're experiencing that and you're like, oh, I also have my money with a friend, you might want to double think that. You might want to check. So anyway,
Yeah.
had
And a
you
lot of people have it with their parents' financial advisor.
Yes.
Like everyone's like,
Yes.
oh, my parents have this advisor. And so I just have my money with them. And their parents
Yep.
have never looked into it, but they feel like they can trust this person because their parents can.
Yep.
And I'm sure, Chloe, you run into this all the time where you end up talking to people that have not a great portfolio that's suited for them. And it's their parents' financial advisor.
Oh, all the time. And then on top of it, it's like this other layer of like, well, like there's this respect. You should have respect for this like grandfathered in financial advisor. And it's like, well, no,
Yeah.
not really. It's like you're allowed to question things. You're allowed to say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. But then it's like this additional layer of dealing with the family asking, well, why'd you leave Greg? Greg's been so good to us.
Yeah.
He sends
Yeah.
us that
And
ham every year,
Yeah, and you're paying, and like the crazy part is, I think part of the reason for that is because the fees are wrapped. Most people are paying assets under management, which is a
Yeah.
percentage of the money that you're investing. So it doesn't feel like you're paying them a lot of money,
Exactly.
but you're paying for a service, and you're paying an astronomical amount for that service if you are
Yes.
paying a percentage of your money, but it doesn't feel like it. So it feels like there's this weird loyalty to stay with them.
Yep.
And I think that's one thing, and we can talk about this later, but there's so many great financial advisors that don't charge like that are fee only, that I think is a much better transparent model where they just charge you hourly and they're incentivized to help you and actually educate you.
Exactly.
But yeah, when it's the assets under management, it's like wrapped up in the mystery of what your investments are doing, and you don't really know. So you don't realize that you're paying Greg thousands and thousands of dollars every month. You have every right to question hundreds of thousands. Yeah.
Oh, that's the crazy thing. And it's like, we're just gonna, you guys buckle up, because we're just gonna get on side tangents about this, because we both feel really passionately about this. Because when you think about the system and how it's been set up for so long, and I will echo what Tess said in that I do think there is a trend of more and more financial advisors, fiduciaries charging fee only. I think that is going to continue to be a trend, and assets under management is not going to be the norm someday. However, right now it is the norm. Most firms are charging you assets under management, and then they may also charge you fees. So that's like, I do want to say I hope, and I think that's going to continue, because there's never going to be, I don't see, at least in our lifetime, there's never going to be a world where financial advisors don't exist. There's never going to be a world where CFPs don't exist. Even with all the finance influencers and educators out there, people who are like learning on their own, there is always going to be people who want to use a professional to help them on their journey. And that's fine. But hopefully that model continues to like move in that direction. But what I was going to say is, when you think about the system, is these financial advisors, as Tess's experience was, they are essentially benefiting from the people who are being managed by them not understanding what they're doing. That benefits them. They have no incentive to educate people. They have no incentive for you to understand. In fact, you understanding is probably a detriment to their bottom line. And then not only that, when you think about it from a perspective, this was actually earlier in this week when I had another interview with a CFP. She was talking about how some fiduciaries will even encourage their clients to not withdraw in retirement, like to take it out of cash, to take it out of these things, because it benefits them keeping this huge sum of money. A 1% fee on a $2 million portfolio is a significantly higher fee than a 1% fee on a $1 million portfolio. So it's like there are so many incentives for them to not do what's in your best interest. And however, at the same time, they can always swing it if there was ever a lawsuit to explain why they were doing it. And they say, well, I gave Tess an annuity because Tess came to me and said, I'm scared. I don't know what I'm doing. I want something that's really safe and secure. And they're like, well, here's an annuity. So that's the big risk, is you don't even realize all the different ways that these people are incentivized to keep you in the dark and to make sure that you are continuing to pay their ridiculously high salaries. So
yeah,
that's my soapbox.
No, well said. And you're right. It's a systemic issue because, like I said, I don't think that this person was intentionally trying to screw me over.
Right.
But the way that she's been taught is to take this annuity that wasn't suitable for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was taught to her as a financial product that was smart for me and sort of, I'm losing the right word here, but pivoted in such a way that you could maybe justify there's a good reason for doing that. And when I actually did confront her about it and I said, look, now that I understand the basics of investing, this investment makes absolutely no sense for me. Why did you recommend that? And she turned it around on me and said, well, you said you wanted to do something else, that you wanted to find more ways to grow your money. And I wanted to find something that would help you create your own pension in retirement. And what she should have said to me is, you don't need that because you're doing great the way it is.
Right.
And with the money, the way that it's growing, you're going to be able to withdraw that money whenever you need in retirement. You don't need to create a pension that has fees and locks up your money for 35 fucking years or whatever it is.
Right.
I'm obviously still angry about this.
And isn't growing at the same rate that something
isn't growing.
Like investing in the stock market is going to grow. That's the crazy thing. So,
and this is like why I'm so passionate about what I do now and what you do is that this situation that happened to me was because of a lack of education, not just on the financial advisor's part, but on mine too. Right. And while it's not necessarily my fault that it happened, it is my responsibility to fix it and to figure it out. And like you said earlier, I'm so glad that it did happen in my 20s and I figured it out in my late 20s because I was able to pivot. And quite frankly, since then, because I was so pissed, it was so motivating for me to learn how to invest and to make smart choices and to be intentional with my money that now I'm probably way wealthier than I would have been had that not have happened, which is the irony of this whole thing.
Right. I mean, and it's true. It's like sometimes these are the big pivotal moments, the big mistakes that have to happen or do happen that make us realize, oh, I need to figure this out for myself. I mean, anybody who listens knows that's my motto. It's like, you can figure this out for yourself. No one is going to be a better advocate for you and your money and your life than you, not your mom. I mean, we see, even thinking of the mom thing. Did you ever see Jules' mom? What's the word where somebody takes money from you without you knowing? It's like
embezzling.
Yeah,
stealing?
like $100 million from her. $100 million. And that's her mother. So it's like, you're never going to find somebody who's going to care more about your money than you, period. End of story. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad you were able to tell us the story now. So I'm sorry it happened to you, but I'm glad you're able to share it now.
Yeah. And, I had a lot of shame. Hey, after it happened and I figured it out, I felt so stupid and betrayed and I was angry, especially because I have a fear of money. So my whole goal was to make sure that my money was safe and I had enough to retire because I wasn't planning on relying on my parents. My mother, we grew up middle class. At that time, I was also finding out my father was asking me for money to help pay for his mortgage. I knew that I didn't have a backup plan. So I felt so much shame and so upset that I'd worked so hard. And then I felt like I threw this down the toilet by not doing my due diligence and not learning. But when you hire a professional to do it for you, that's the whole point in your head, right? That's the whole point, is for them to take care of it and for you to trust them. And unfortunately, the system just isn't built that way. Right. And I think one major flag for me now, which I think is good for everybody to hear, is whenever I talk to financial advisors, a lot of them, especially the fee-only ones, love what Chloe and I do. They think it's awesome that we're educating people. They're super excited about it. And then there's a group of people, and I just actually lost a speaking gig because there was a CFP in the group that didn't want me to come on because she said that I tell people like all financial advisors are bad, which is wholly untrue. I don't say that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I was like uninvited from the speaking opportunity because of that. And to me, that's a massive red flag because neither Chloe or I are saying you should never work with a financial advisor. Both of us will say, if you want to, you still need an education, but you can probably do it yourself and learn how to do it yourself. And it's way simpler than you probably think it is. And you owe it to yourself to get an education. But after you do, if that's what you want to do, that's totally fine. But you still want to be educated enough to have an intelligent conversation with your financial advisor and know what questions to ask, because as Chloe just said, you care more about your money than they do.
Yep. And if they're doing something wrong, you want to know. And the only way for you to know if they're doing something wrong or doing something that's not appropriate for you is for you to have that financial education. Even if you go to somebody else and you like have them give you a second opinion, you need to know this stuff, like period, end of story. So, but yes, I echo everything that you just said. Now, to kind of turn it around, look at you now. So you were able to build your net worth by over $500,000 in about 4 years, if I remember correctly. Where did this transformation take place? What happened after you were a diver on a cruise ship, which I didn't even know that you did that. And that is so cool. Seriously, the more I get to know you, the more I'm just like, I'm so glad we're friends. Like, I wish we lived closer.
Me too.
But yeah, tell us, okay, what changed? What was the shift? Let's start with what happened after this moment of realization that, oh shit, this isn't going the way that I thought it was.
Sure. So I broke up with my financial advisor and a friend, which quite honestly wasn't a person that I really wanted to be friends with. So it was okay. And I'm a big believer that when you cut things out of your life, you create space for better things. So I ended up spending a lot of time self-educating. And at first I overcomplicated things a little bit. I went back to reading financial statements and stock picking. And thankfully I was very motivated to find an easier way because I was convinced that there was. And sure enough, at some point I came around to A Simple Path to Wealth. And I think that is the book that made me realize how easy investing can actually be. And around the same time too, when I got off cruise ships, I started working in digital marketing, and I ended up joining a company that I am still with today, working my way up. And now I oversee operations and technology. And around that time, I also got really motivated to increase my salary, realized I wasn't making the money that I should be. And so I was kind of parallel processing a few things. One, realizing that I was capable of making so much more money if I asked for it, if I chase the right opportunities, and not necessarily having to work harder, just self-advocate more. And then I also realized that I could start investing on my own. And so I started fighting for my salary. I started investing aggressively. And at that time, and I will be totally transparent here, a lot of that net worth is because I chose to sell my condo and move into a multifamily property. And I am a big believer that investing in real estate is not for everybody. And what I like to share with people is that if it's something that you're interested in, it's not necessarily passive, first of all. I think that is like a big myth that like you can like buy a house and just chill and like all this money will come into your bank account.
Yeah.
That's like not quite how it works. But I will say I do have a few investment properties now. This decision for me was a sacrifice. I moved out of a condo that I loved and into a multifamily in a city that I was meh about, quite frankly. But it gave me this opportunity in my mind to catch up from everything that happened, to make the money back. And honestly, I still live here. It's a beautiful 2-family. It's a side by side, and the other side pretty much covers the mortgage. And so that couple year sacrifice for me was totally worth it. That's not for everybody. Some people might not want to do that, but I am so glad I did, because now I have the freedom and flexibility to get whatever, well, not whatever house I want, but get a nice house and not be house poor. I have flexibility to leave my job if I want. I have optionality in terms of where I want to live location wise, especially with everything that's going on in the world, if I don't want to live somewhere specifically. So I'm very glad I did it. But that three-pronged combination of increasing my income significantly, I think I almost 2x'd my income in those few years, moving into a house hack, and then aggressively investing in whatever I saved in rent into really simple investments like index funds, turned it around really quickly. And one thing that I like to say to people when they say things like, oh, you're so lucky. Like this journey took 10 years and
Right.
5 years of really intentional effort. And so I think it is unrealistic to say, you know, if you start investing today, by the end of the year, you'll be a millionaire or whatever. Like that's insane. But if you start educating yourself now in 5 years, regardless of where you are today, I believe that you can be in a dramatically better place. What that is
100%.
depends on where you are, but if you can have like a little bit of a long-term mindset in this journey and take small steps and learn different things as you go, you can make a massive difference in your life. My entire life changed in 5 years just by a little bit of intentional effort.
Yes, I love that because I echo the same sentiment of sometimes just a few years of sacrifice and like really intentional focus can set you up for the rest of your life. In a similar way, it was like my late 20s when I was like, wow, I really need to figure this shit out. And I went into, I think a lot of us enter in through the debt-free community. And when I entered in through the debt-free community, it was like my eyes were open and I thought the only thing I had to do was pay off all of my debt and then I'd be free. And so I went ham on paying off all my debt as much as possible over the course of about a year and a half until I like learned like, oh, there's this other half of the equation. There's this whole like investing thing that I should be doing. But in the time frame where I went from being like completely unconscious at all about my money to very frugal, investing, saving more than half of my income, that was maybe like a 2.5, 3 year period where I was like uber frugal. And luckily for me, I got to acknowledge the privilege I had of we entered into a pandemic. Like I was in my most frugal moments were probably 2019, 2020, and 2021. And that was like it all worked out for me that it happened to like all these like obviously I'm not thankful for the pandemic, but for it to really help me hunker down and just be like, all right, well, I guess we're reading on the weekends, we're not ordering DoorDash. It was a lot easier to do that, but just doing that for a couple of years helped set me up. It's like now at this point, if I never invested another dollar, I will still be able to retire with millions in the bank or in the brokerage. But obviously, I'm going to continue investing. I think that's often overlooked. I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to have to deprive myself forever. I'm going to have to deprive myself for 10 years. And granted, you and I both talk about how increasing your income has to be part of that. Neither of us would have seen the amount of growth that we saw in such a short period of time had we not been focusing on increasing our income. Do you have to double your income in 2 years? No, but you need to be thinking about like, I can only cut out so much. At what point do I need to recognize that like the problem here is that not enough is coming in?
100%. And I do think that there's a lot of messaging out there, especially on social media, when you start to get into the personal finance world. And some of it is pretty misleading in terms of like, you see entrepreneurs that are like 3 months ago, I was destitute and now I have $2 million. And it makes you feel like you shouldn't start because
right.
3 months, like, no way are you going to get there. We didn't get there in 3 months. That's insane.
No.
That's one message I see a lot that I think is really detrimental because it prevents people from even starting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other message that I've seen is this idea that no matter how much you make, you can invest and build your wealth. And unfortunately, with inflation the way it is and the cost of things, if you are increasing your salary or increasing your income or raising your prices, if you're a business owner or whatever it is going to be really hard to make changes and to increase your wealth significantly. I think that's really important concept that I've had a lot of conversations recently, actually, with business owners that have good businesses and they're feeling stretched and they're feeling burnt out and they couldn't figure out why. And then I'd be like, well, when's the last time you raised your prices? 5 years. Like inflation's gone up 19%. You just gave yourself a 20% pay cut in the last 5 years because you haven't raised your prices and you're not able to serve your customers because you're burnt out. it's really important to look at the whole equation and parallel process multiple things. So I agree, Chloe. I think it's really important to find ways to increase your income while you are investing. You don't have to do it all at the same time. Like you can learn the basics of investing, start investing with whatever you got, like $100 a month. If that's all you have, like fine. It's great to get started, build the habit. And then you can turn your attention back to your income and say, okay, how do I increase that $100 number? So you don't have to do it all at the same time, but you do have to do all of it.
Yes. Yeah. You got to look at it. Like, at least if you want to make significant progress and if you want to make speedy progress, it's like you can retire, I'm sure, by cutting back and investing. But if you see, I don't know what I was trying to say, because it's like, it's so dependent person to person and income to income, but it's like, most of the time you can't do it by just looking at cutting back, just being debt free, just doing like those individual things. You gotta combine the whole thing. And I feel like the income one is the one where we often, I think, feel the most resistance. I think a lot of us like try to avoid that piece because it feels harder. It's like that one and the investing, which are the two most powerful things that we have to be doing. So I know we're coming up on almost 2:00 here, so we'll wrap it up relatively soon here, but we'll have to have you back on just to talk about your career journey, because I don't want to gloss over the fact that this woman said, she's like, yeah, I was basically in a circus. And then I'm like head of tech and development at a huge firm. Like, I'm like, we're going to have to break that down sometime. Like, it was so glossed over. And like, that was like, what, a 10-year period?
Yes. I left cruise ships when I was 25. Bought my first investment property that was a total mess. Yeah, I'll have to come back. I can share that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to dive into that because I think that's so cool and I love it. And like Tess is very modest. She's a big deal at where she's at right now, and she's very modest about it. So we'll the trajectory of literally in a circus on a cruise ship.
But it was
badass like bitch.
It was a 10-year period though, right? So, I got off ships. I did some work at a digital marketing company. And you know what? I give this advice to people when I go back and do a lot of guest lecturing at Boston University, which is my alma mater. And one thing I tell the students all the time is one of the smartest things I ever did is to choose a company that had growth opportunities and had a culture that I fit into, because I am a very particular type of person. I'm very direct. I have a personality. I don't fit the normal corporate mold. So I looked for a company this was when remote work wasn't a thing. I knew I didn't want to work in an office because I can't wear like nice things. Like I'm a total jock. It's too hard for me. So I was like, that's not going to work. So back when before remote work was like a thing, I looked for a company that had remote work and was a good culture and had growth opportunity. And I started as a temp at this company 7 years ago. And they were like, this is kind of like below your pay grade. I took like a $30K pay cut to work at this company. But I did that because I saw the opportunity. If I play this right, I can grow quickly. And I did. And so, I got promoted like 7 times in the last 7 years or whatever. And I took the opportunities in front of me and I committed to finding ways to increase my income. But the reason that worked is because I didn't take the highest paying job. I took the job that could lead me to more money. Yeah. And there's a difference there, especially if you fit in and especially if it's a good fit for you culturally, you're going to do well.
Oh, I completely agree. And I got to like highlight too. She just said she spent how many years at this job? 7 to 10 years?
7 years.
So, I mean, you were able to significantly doubled your income still at the same company. So it's like
tripled. More than almost 4x. But like I started as a temp. I started as a temp.
Okay,
so.
Fair enough. So you're like, listen, I was making pennies, so it was easy to double it, but
I was making like 50K when I started.
Yeah,
so.
But still, I mean, I think sometimes we overlook it. And I mean, I talk about switching jobs a lot, and like I think it's one of the easiest ways to make more money. But totally. when it's a good culture fit and you're being really intentional about why you're saving or staying, I understand it. So very cool. And I agree with you too. I mean, when I came back from China and was looking for a job, I had no idea what I wanted to do. and I was afraid that I had no skills. So the biggest thing that I wanted was a company that was going to give me opportunities to work with multiple different departments to really find myself in my career. And I made that clear even in the interviews. And it's like, I want this position. It interests me because I notice it has exposure to all these different things. And like my ideal situation is to pick one of those things and grow with this company in that way. So yeah, I echo a lot of that. So before we move into the fun questions that I always end with, I like to give everybody like 3 takeaway tips that they can incorporate. And since we're really talking about, how to recover from financial mistakes, which so many of us have had and have experienced, what would you say your top 3 tips are for somebody who's looking at their mistakes? They're like, I've made a ton of them. They're like, 20K, I wish that was my mistake. What would you say to them as like the first 3 tips to get themselves out of that situation?
Sure. So the first thing I would do is give yourself grace, because there are so many people that have made so many big money mistakes. Chloe has, I have, and most people have a big money mistake. We don't talk about it a lot because we don't normalize conversations around money, and money is a really taboo topic, but most people have made a really dumb mistake when it comes to money. So first of all, know you're not alone and give yourself some grace. We don't learn how to manage our money in high school or college or anywhere. So it's easy to make mistakes when you're not educated. So that's the first thing. It's not going to necessarily happen again as long as you, number 2, take action and get an education. And that can be a really overwhelming thing for people if you just say, just get a financial education. I would pick any topic that you're interested, whether it's credit or whether it's budgeting, any topic that you're interested, pick up a book on it. If you don't like books, pick up a podcast. If you don't like podcasts, pick up a course. If you don't want to pay for anything, find a YouTube. Pick one topic. If you want to learn about investing, Google what's an index fund. It doesn't have to be complicated, and you can start with little bits. And if you learn a little bit as you go, it's going to make a huge difference in your life. Most people don't ever take that action. Don't take an action to learn. So if you see an opportunity to learn, take it. That would be my second piece of advice. And then my third piece of advice would be to really look at your relationship with money. Understand what your money mindset is and what your money story is. And that takes some reflection. But one way I like to do this, and I've had a few people in my beginner investing program do this, is create a money diary of what you're spending money on and how it makes you feel. And so if you're spending money on something and you feel guilty, you feel guilty about that. If you spend money and you feel like, I don't deserve this, like, why do you feel that way? And the reason I think that's really important, especially in the beginning of your money journey, is because even if you start to make more money, if you haven't reflected on your money fears, you might be scared to invest it, or you start to make more money and you spend it because you feel like that's something that makes you feel better. You might be an emotional spender. There's no shame in that, but understanding what your relationship with money looks like is really important. It's going to help you create wealth faster. And so for me, I had so much fear around investing. I actually hoarded a bunch of cash for a long time. And now I'm grateful for that because I didn't give it to the financial advisor. But it probably would have been better actually mathematically if she was managing it. But I held on to a lot of cash for a long time because I was afraid.
Yeah.
And that even though I knew how to invest, even though I knew the basics, even though I knew the value investing, I still couldn't invest that money because I wanted to keep it safe, like I did when I was a kid, and I put all the money underneath I literally put money underneath my mattress when I was a kid, and I would like hide it.
That's such an old, like I love that you were like a little old lady doing that.
Yeah, while I was then giving money to the drug dealer down the street in exchange for more money back.
Balance.
So I would say those 3 things is really educating yourself on something in particular that's anything. It doesn't have to be big. You don't have to change your life, but getting an education, understanding your money mindset. And then I honestly forgot the first thing I said, which I feel like was the most important thing. To go back.
Shit. Wait, now we're testing me. What was the first thing? Oh, give yourself grace.
Oh, yeah. The most important. It is the most important. Give yourself grace. Yeah. Because you can't move forward if you don't forgive yourself. Hey.
Yeah. No, those are all fantastic tips. I love it. Well, Tess, thank you for coming on today. Before we get to our final 2 questions, tell everybody, where can they find you? How can they work with you? Promote yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Chloe. So you can find me on Instagram and on TikTok at Wealth with Tess on Instagram or TikTok. And then I always have some kind of free content in the link in my bio. So I have some free guides, a financial independence checklist that you can stack for free. I usually am promoting a free investing workshop to help you get started. And I have some other free guides on my website at wealthwithtess.com. But I'd love to hear from you. I answer DMs. So if you have a question, don't be afraid to ask it and shoot me a message. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to help you in your money journey.
Awesome. We'll leave links to all that in the show notes. Now, Tess, your first money fun question. What was your very first money memory?
So the first impactful money memory for me was probably that I can specifically remember was when I was a teenager and I started coaching at this golf club. And the golf club was pretty wealthy people. And I remember getting a tip that was like absurd. Like I was 15 years old and I was coaching or 16, and I got like $100 tip for like half an hour of coaching. And I just remember in that moment, and I didn't get back to this until years later, but realizing it's possible to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that was like the first time I realized that it was possible to make money doing different things. And quite honestly, I had a pretty scarcity mindset around money until the last 5 years or so. But I think about that now because that was such an eye opener for me that you can really, if you do a good job at something, which I was really good at coaching, diving, that's what I was doing, you can make a lot of money doing anything.
I love that. What a positive, like early money memory of just like, wait, this is all made up. I can just like make whatever I want. I love that.
Totally.
Fantastic. And a fun question for you. What is something you're binging right now? And it could be a TV show, it could be a podcast, it could be a book series you're loving, it could be your new favorite cereal. What's something you're obsessed with right now?
That is a great poke. Yeah. So there
Okay.
is a now that the weather is nice, I'm in Massachusetts. It's fucking freezing all year. And I eat poke no matter what the season is.
Fair
But
enough.
come like spring and summer, it tastes so good and it's so healthy. And it's confusing because I feel like it shouldn't be good for you because it's so freaking good.
Right.
But it is great for you. And I think if I had to die off one food, it would be poke. So now that we've gotten into like spring, summer, they must have good poke in San Diego.
Oh, absolutely. They have great everything.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, they have great everything. But funny enough, poke is like me and my boyfriend, we will fuck up some poke. Love.
Really?
And actually, this weekend I went to, there was something in Del Mar called Foodie Land, and it was just like a food festival. And Leandra, female in finance, she and I went, and she's a big food person too. But we found poke nachos. And it's they made poke with the like wontons were like the tortilla chips, and they were so crispy and delicate, so freaking good. So if you ever see poke nachos, highly recommend. Obviously they're not as healthy, but still delicious. It was fantastic. So yeah, I love some poke. But yeah, everything you could want is out here. So if you ever come out this way, we'll go get some.
Yeah, now I need to try these poke nachos. So
yeah, I love it. Awesome. Well, it was so good having you on. I'm so glad we got to catch up as well. And thanks again for coming on to the Money Bear podcast.
Thank you, Chloe. I'm super grateful for you. And I've learned so much from you. And it was just so fun to talk to you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Money Bear podcast. If you've made it this far, do us a favor, take 2 seconds, rate, review, and subscribe. It seriously means the world to me. And if you just take a sec to do that, I will appreciate you endlessly. And if you do, let me know on Instagram and I'll thank you personally. So got that. And of course, since we were talking about anything financial on this show, please note that nothing on this show is intended as financial advice. I don't know you, unfortunately, and because of that, I cannot tell you what to do with your money. You got to work with a financial professional who knows your situation, who is preferably a fiduciary, and keep in mind that everything that we talk about on this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It's all my opinion. So there's that. If you want to see our full terms and conditions, head on over to the show notes. And while you're there, we've got free resources for you to get started on your money journey down in the show notes as well, including a free guide to help you with your budgeting templates and budgeting tutorials and investing 101, understanding the different accounts that are out there. All that good stuff is inside of my free guide, which is also available at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/guide. And if you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, also, I've got a free investing class that is available at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. We host it once a month. If you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, I am also hosting a monthly investing class. And that investing class, you can find the times we're offering it this month at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. That link is in the show notes as well. And that's where you have the chance to meet me live and ask those money questions live. It's a good time. We've had over 20,000 people as of recording this join or register. And yeah, it's always nice to meet you guys. So I hope to see you there. Again, all that is available down in the show notes. So thank you again for coming and listening. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.